Hi everyone and welcome to Dark Night Scare. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're diving into two stories that took place in different parts of the Appalachian Mountains, but both leave us with zero closure. The first one's a bit longer than what usually cover here, but as soon as I received it, I knew I had to share it with you. The second one is straight up terrifying. And if you do even a little digging, you'll see just how disturbing it is, especially because of how often it actually happens. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. What I'm going to tell you is something that is still going on. And to be truthful, over all of this, I believe I'm starting to really lose my mind. I feel like I'm trapped, and I have this feeling that something very bad is going to happen to me. The story I'm about to share is about people I love and people I had complete trust in until just recently. I swear I have no idea what to do. I'm feeling totally lost. My boyfriend and I, about a month ago, decided we would take a short vacation to a cabin in the Smokies. I'm going to call him Philip, but that isn't his real name. We had stayed in a cabin before, a different one in another area of the same mountains, and because it was such a wonderful experience, we wanted to do it over again. The plan was straightforward. Spend a quiet week, mostly for my sake, because my job had been draining me of all my energy and I had a serious need to disconnect. Forests for me have always been a sanctuary. I used to hike alone frequently, even before I met Philip. So, that feeling of being isolated was not new to me, nor was it uncomfortable. And since I was going through a difficult time, Philip took care of everything. He chose the location and handled the reservation all by himself. But from the day we arrived, things began to go wrong. The cabin was nothing like what the advertisement had promised. And the front door, if it wasn't so serious, it would have been funny. It was so weak that a single strong push could have broken it open. A child could likely have gotten inside if they really wanted to. We were out in the middle of nowhere, making the chances of anyone just appearing pretty slim. Even so, I felt entirely vulnerable and unprotected. I mentioned this to Philip immediately. He looked at my face and made an effort to calm me down. He said not to worry, that we could just block the door and it would all be okay. That first night, we slid the couch against the door, not because it would really stop a person, but it would at least create some noise if an incident occurred. And that gave me just enough calm to get some sleep. We weren't expecting anything to happen. It was merely a precaution. We had sort of mapped out our vacation days. And on that first morning, our plan was to hike a trail that was nearby. I was awake before Philip and had gotten everything ready for us to leave. I only had to get a rope from the car. I had forgotten it in there, and I always take one for safety. Ever since we watched a documentary on surviving in the wilderness, I've started taking these precautions more seriously. The car was a walk of about 15 minutes from the cabin, so I let him know he should finish getting ready as I went to retrieve it. I estimated I would return in 30 minutes at the most. The walk itself was pleasant. It put me in the right mindset for hiking and helped me begin to enjoy the day. The trail we intended to take was among the longer ones, and it was going to take up the majority of our day, so we had no expectation of being back at the cabin before evening. The forest was quiet, and with it being early summer, everything was gorgeous. It was a good day in general, but toward the end, we were both exhausted. And despite there being a lot of daylight left, we felt ready to just be inside. That was when I noticed something that made my chest feel tight. And in retrospect, I really should have insisted more on it. There, on the front step of the cabin, right on the railing, was a cigarette butt. It seemed like it had been sitting there for hours. It wasn't fresh. There was no smell lingering. And I was almost positive it was not there that morning. It was placed right in the center. I'm certain I would have seen it. Neither of us smokes, so I asked Philip if he'd noticed it earlier. He glanced at the cigarette butt in my hand and made an expression I'd never witnessed before. I can't even put it into words. I just knew that look was new to me. Then he looked at me and said, yeah, that he had seen it before, and it was likely from a previous guest. He said it was common, telling me not to be concerned, but his tone, the way he said it gave me a strange feeling. I was nearly certain it wasn't there before, yet he appeared so confident and calm that I just dropped it. He assured me nobody was around, that all was well. So, I just let it go. We entered the cabin and moved the couch back to block the door. I did my routine check, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Everything seemed to be in order, so my nerves eventually settled and I forgot about the cigarette. The following day, our problems started to accumulate. We were without hot water and then lost electricity. The cabin was off the grid, but it had 2 generators for comfort. We attempted to get in touch with the cabin's owner, but we rarely even had cell reception and my stress was building. This was meant to be a vacation for relaxation, but it was turning into a series of small, odd events. And I'm aware it may sound foolish, particularly to an outsider hearing this, but it was the sum of all these minor things. Individually, they were all manageable, and you could even justify them. But when put together, they created a strange pattern. And I began to feel increasingly like something was genuinely wrong. I told Philip that things didn't feel right and suggested that maybe we should just go, but he was insistent that we stay. He said it was nothing, simple to fix. He said we should just enjoy ourselves since we were already there. He told me that since he was the one who booked the cabin, he would take care of it. He told me to just rest while he went to find a signal, or in the worst case scenario, someone in the closest town for help. When I offered to go with him, he snapped at me that I was stressing him out and that it would be for the best if I just stayed and rested. He had never spoken to me in that manner before. I considered that maybe he was correct. Perhaps I was just getting stressed over nothing. So I relented and said, okay, I would stay behind and try to relax as he sorted it all out. I felt like I was being paranoid, which was a frequent feeling I had around him. I persuaded myself that he was right, that my exhaustion and stress were the cause, and that I simply needed to relax. As you might imagine, that was a huge error. I will never again ignore my gut feelings. It's better to be paranoid and seem crazy than to be injured, or worse. Because when I look back, and you'll see, the clues were all present. We just don't always understand how to heed what our bodies and minds are screaming at us. Ever since my return from the Smokies, I've been attempting to sort out what was real and what was just planted inside my head. I have never had this much self-doubt. So, to get back to the story and what took place next, he departed and I remained. I estimated he would be back within 2 or 3 hours, but the hours ticked by and there was still no sign of him. I attempted to call him, nothing. And as more time passed, the more I felt like a total fool for staying by myself. No vehicle, no way to communicate, no electricity, and no clue if he was ever coming back. I was on the couch, replaying all the things I should have done differently when I noticed some movement outside. It was already dark, and my assumption was that it must be Philip. So, without a second thought, I rushed to the door. I genuinely believed it was him, but the moment my hand made contact with the doorknob, an inner voice told me, "Stop." I felt my throat tighten. On the other side of the door, someone walked onto the porch and then knocked. It was not Philip. It couldn't have been. If it was him, he would have called out. He was aware I was alone and anxious. He would not have just knocked. I was frozen in place, my hand still on the knob. Then I heard the sound of footsteps moving away. I peeked through the window and I saw a man. His back was to me, and he was walking into the pitch-black darkness. I was unable to see his face. It was too dark, and he was turned away, but I was certain it was a man. That confirmation that I was not alone struck me like a ton of bricks. Did he tamper with the generators, with a plan to leave me isolated here, but how? The suggestion for me to stay behind had been Philip's. Nobody could have foreseen that. And that is when I noticed a white envelope that had been slid under the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I slowly bent down and retrieved it. My hands were shaking as I stared at it for what seemed like an eternity. Then I opened it, and I was completely unprepared for what I saw inside. It was a set of photos of me. The oldest one was from at least 3 years ago, showing me eating on my college campus. I graduated 3 years ago. Another one was taken on my doorstep. Based on my hairstyle, it was probably taken about a year ago. There was one at my workplace that appeared to have been taken only days before, and one of me asleep in my own bed. How? How in the world could someone have taken a picture of me while I was sleeping? I felt a wave of nausea and had to sit down. I was trembling, unable to think clearly, unable to breathe. It felt as if the floor had disappeared from under me. I'm not sure how long I remained there, my mind racing through every single possible explanation. The one person with a key to my apartment was Philip, and I had never seen any indication that someone had been inside without me knowing, let alone a break-in. I stood up and peered through the windows. I saw no one. The forest seemed much darker than it had the day before, almost as if it were frozen in time. I rechecked all the windows, and then pushed not only the couch, but also one of the cabinets to barricade the door. I had no idea what the night would bring, but I knew for certain I had a stalker, someone who had been watching me for a minimum of 3 years. That night was the first time I began to suspect Philip. His behavior had been odd since our arrival. He was the one who booked the cabin. He was the one who insisted I stay behind. He was passive-aggressive when I mentioned wanting to leave. At the same time, I couldn't help but worry about him, questioning if I was being unjust, if something might have happened to him. Perhaps that man had done something to him, and that was the reason he hadn't returned. Maybe I was being incredibly unfair. What I couldn't get out of my head was how our relationship began. We had been together for around 8 months, but I had first met Philip in college, during my last year. We had friends in common, and would occasionally see each other at parties or dinners. In those days, I had a suspicion he liked me, but he never made a move, and I wasn't interested in a relationship at the time. But in the 2 years that followed, we continued to cross paths. Despite not living near each other, I would run into him at the movie theater, the supermarket, the park. He told me one day he believed it was destiny that we kept meeting like that. I found that to be sweet and romantic. And after that day, we grew closer. We eventually began to date. It had never crossed my mind that our frequent encounters might not have been a good thing. Now, sitting there by myself with someone outside the cabin, I couldn't help but question if the events leading to our relationship were far from romantic and certainly not fated. Maybe he had engineered it all. Maybe he had been following me. Then I began to review every single detail that I might have overlooked in my stress. I thought about the man who delivered the envelope. It was dark, and I was petrified when I saw him outside. But the more I replayed it in my mind, the more I came to realize that it could have been Philip. His back was turned, but his build, his shape, it could have been him. I spent that whole night agonizing over all of this, feeling like an awful girlfriend for even considering it, for having doubts about him. But in the morning, I received confirmation that something was very wrong. He returned to the cabin at around 10:30 a.m. I was, of course, in a state of shock. The instant he entered, I detected the faint scent of tobacco in the air. I then asked him what had happened, why he had been gone for so long. He explained that he had gone to the village, and since it was already after 6 when he was done, he simply didn't feel like making the drive back to the cabin. The way he said it, so casually, it felt like a punch in the stomach. Even if he was not involved in what had occurred, he had prioritized his own comfort over my extreme distress. He was aware of how stressed I would be, and yet he still chose to make me endure that. I told him a man had been outside the cabin, that I was being stalked, and he responded that I was being paranoid, that perhaps I needed professional help. Another blow to the gut. He was attempting to make my feelings seem invalid, and was being passive-aggressive once more. I presented him with the photos, and his expression hardly shifted. By then, I was almost entirely convinced of his involvement, and I understood that for my own safety, I needed to pretend I suspected nothing. I had to escape from that remote location with a person I believed to be my stalker. I succeeded in convincing him I was in agreement, that I was overreacting, that I was paranoid. I told him I wished to remain at the cabin, to forget all that had happened, and to simply enjoy the rest of the vacation, but that my stomach was feeling very unsettled, and I thought I might be coming down with something. One thing I was certain of was that he was a hypochondriac. The very last thing he would want was to be cooped up with me if there was any possibility I was sick and could infect him. So in the end, he agreed that we could leave. The drive home was silent. I feigned sleep at various points just to avoid conversation. The moment he dropped me off at my place, I went out the back door and headed directly to the police station. I'm not sure what was more terrifying, what took place at the cabin, or the police's response when they informed me that without solid proof, their hands were tied, and even with proof, he had not been violent. I did not return to my home. I left the police station and went straight to the airport. Fortunately, there was a late-night flight to the state where my parents reside. I'm not going to say which state, and luckily, he never knew my parents' location. He never inquired, and I never volunteered the information. I got a new phone and had my parents do the same. Many people might think I'm overreacting, but I know what I witnessed, and I know what I felt. Some mornings I wake up with new memories of details, new red flags that I brushed aside. As of now, I have not heard anything from him. I am unsure of what will come next, but I do not believe I will ever set foot in that house again. I'm not the type of person who is good at telling stories, especially when I have to talk about how things affected me emotionally. So I'm just going to tell it like it was. This took place 3 years back, right in the middle of October. My friend Jake and I had a 3-night hike planned through the Appalachian backcountry, just below the Virginia border. Not the kind of trails you'd see on all trails or something. These were authentic, almost forgotten paths, the type people stopped using once the logging industry in the region declined. We were both born and raised in that part of Tennessee, where pretty much everyone has a relative with some bizarre story about the woods. You either end up being afraid of those tales, or you hear them so often they lose all meaning. They just become part of the background. Jake and I were more in the latter group. We had heard it all. Skinwalkers, feral humans, secret government labs, strange lights in the sky, and we just laughed that man-made off over a beer and a, yeah, whatever, man. We traveled light. We had tents, a stove, some bear spray, and enough whiskey to stay warm at night. We both had our rifles with us. Jake had his father's old trail map, a worn-out thing from the 80s with faded ink and handwritten pencil notes. It was almost absurd how he took that thing with him everywhere, but I had stopped commenting on it. His father died 5 years ago, and since then he's clung to these little mementos. To me it felt pointless. Anything could happen, and he could lose them in an instant. But if it brought him some comfort and made sense to him, it wasn't my place to say anything. Our plan was to make camp near an old fire lookout on the second night, and then take a different trail back down. It seemed like a good idea. We were 26 and felt like we were invincible out there. Jake used to say that nothing in the woods was worse than people, and we felt prepared to handle people. The reality is, we were foolish and naive, and we genuinely believed we were the toughest guys out there. The first day was good. The sky was clear. Leaves were crunching beneath our boots. The whole perfect golden hour you experience in October. We set up camp beside a creek, had just enough to drink to sleep soundly. There was no cell service, but that was what we wanted. It felt like a true escape from the world. It was during the second day that the woods began to feel strange. The trail Jake thought he remembered was more difficult to follow than he had indicated. We would lose it for 30 minutes at a stretch, only to find it again, twisting uphill as if it were actively trying to lose us. And then it became quiet. Like genuinely quiet. I've spent enough time in the woods to recognize the sound of normal quiet. This was something else. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, just the sound of leaves falling in our own boots. That was it. We reached the lookout spot in the late afternoon, and the tower was mostly in ruins. Only the base remained, with a few charred planks on top, probably from a lightning strike or some idiot camper years ago. Still, the view was incredible. You could see for miles. Ridges fading into the haze like a sea of trees frozen in motion. I'm not one to get sentimental, but man, that view was really something. We made camp not far from there, maybe 30 yards from the cliff's edge, got a fire going, made some food, and drank a little more of the whiskey than we probably should have. Sometime around 9, maybe 9:30, Jake mentioned he was going to relieve himself, and he walked off into the trees. That's the moment I heard the first noise. It was the sound of footsteps. I realize how much of a cliche that is, but I swear to God, the sound of boots on dry leaves is unmistakable. They were slow, deliberate steps. And they didn't belong to Jake. I know his walk. These steps were heavier, like they belonged to a larger person, maybe wearing work boots. Then, out of the blue, the footsteps ceased, just like that. Complete silence. I held my breath without realizing it, my ears straining to hear anything in the darkness. And that's when I heard it. A faint, subtle sound, a small click. It was incredibly soft, but it sliced through the silence like a needle. It could have been anything, but it sounded like a lighter being flicked open. I didn't move a muscle, didn't say a word. I just stared past the fire into the pitch black. It was one of those times when your mind tries to convince you you're hearing things, but your gut knows better. A few seconds later, it was there. The smell. It was very faint at first, but then it got stronger. Weed. Somebody was out there smoking. Jake returned a minute later, stumbling a bit from the whiskey, laughing about almost peeing on his own shoe. Then he glanced at me, his grin already a bit fuzzy, and he asked if I had brought any weed, which confirmed I hadn't imagined it. He could smell it as well. I didn't reply to his question. I asked him instead if he had seen anyone. He gave me a strange look and said no. I watched his smile vanish from his face, and his expression became dead serious. We knew each other well enough that we could communicate through body language without speaking. He could tell I wasn't joking around, and he saw that I was scared. Without speaking another word, he reached for his rifle and began to scan the tree line. I immediately grabbed mine too. After a long while of trying to let my eyes adjust to the darkness, I thought I could see a faint wisp of white smoke, barely visible. It was almost as if my mind was inventing it, but there was something out there. I took a step forward, with my rifle raised, and I yelled for whoever was out there to show themselves. Jake moved up right behind me, his rifle also up, but pointing in the opposite direction to cover my back. We stayed in that position for who knows how long, until a man emerged from the woods. Like I mentioned at the start, I'm not great with words, but when I say this guy looked like a complete psychopath, I am not exaggerating. I am absolutely sure of it. That serene, peaceful expression on his face. He walked as if he didn't even see we had our guns trained on him, as if we weren't even present. I didn't lower my rifle for even a second. Jake still had my back, steady as a rock. I asked him what in the hell he was doing out there, and I told him to stay right where he was. And then he said the most calculated, most deranged thing I have ever heard. He told us not to be concerned. He said he had already taken out a family just a short distance away, and he was good for at least a month now. I asked him what the hell he meant by that, and he just smiled. That same empty, quiet smile. Then Jake asked him what was on his clothes. That was the first time I actually looked at what he had on. My focus had been locked on his face up to that point. His clothes were covered in blood. I still can't comprehend how I missed it before. And it looked fresh too. The firelight caught it in a way that made it glisten in certain spots. His response was, "You know damn well what this is." And then he turned and simply walked back into the trees. He didn't look at us again. He just vanished into the forest as if nothing had just happened. We didn't need any more convincing. We called the police right then and there. And trust me, in this area, calling the police is not something we ever do lightly. When there's a problem, we typically take care of it ourselves. But this was far beyond anything we were equipped to handle. That man was a killer, a full-blown psychopath. We stood there, rifles in hand, back to back, on high alert for every single sound. It took the cops about 45 minutes to reach us, which frankly is a record time for this area. They were more proactive than I would have thought. They even brought in a damn helicopter, but after 2 days, there was zero trace of anything we reported. No family and no man. The guy could have escaped, but an entire family doesn't just vanish. If his story was true, they would be dead. They should have been discovered. It's been 3 years since that night. I haven't been able to forget that man's face for a single second. I don't believe I ever will. I have tried to tell myself it was maybe some sick individual playing a twisted joke, but deep down, I know that's not it. I believe that when you are face to face with someone who is truly evil, truly disturbed, you just know.